We live in a chaotic, complex world, and I like to dumb things down as much as possible because we can't get things done unless it's simple. So every time an opportunity comes up in my family or in my business, I'm like, is this gonna simplify my life or is this gonna complicate my life? And it's a daily debate. More than 95% of what you do and what I do on a daily basis is unconscious. We don't add conscious thought to it, we just do it. And so probability forces you and me to add consciousness to our decisions. And so probability means if you do something in business, is this going to increase the probability that you hit the stated objective? If you do something in your personal life, is this going to increase the probability of you hitting the stated objective? And people don't think like that. Everything that we do as business people, we should strive to do things as simple as possible that increase the probability that we have the stated outcome. Now, the stated outcome for me and for people watching here would be to create wealth and use high probability decision making to do that. But oftentimes people use low probability. So this is just an interesting thing.
Money Revealed is an exclusive video series where self-made millionaires share their secrets on how they got rich. In this video, you'll learn how to optimize your environment, make good investing decisions, and instill habits for massive success. These are the lessons that they don't teach you in school about making money. And we've partnered with the series creator Jeff Hayes to bring it to you on my YouTube channel. Enjoy.
Next up, we have a phenomenal entrepreneur, a terrific investor, spent a lot of time on Wall Street, and also a dear personal friend of mine, Rick Sapio. Rick Sapio is a guy who got a perfect score on his math SATs, but at the same time, he's not living in some academic ivory tower. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite of that. He's a roll-up-his-sleeves, rough-and-tumble entrepreneur who understands the inner workings of Wall Street, investment, understands business growth and expansion. He's got business principles that have had massive impact on me, and now I get to share him with you. So enjoy this interview with Rick Sapio. Rick, thanks for taking the time to sit and have this conversation.
You're welcome.
So let's talk about your story, because I think that really helped to form a lot of your activities today and kind of your outcomes. So talk about your background.
Yeah, a lot of this that I'm going to talk about is relatively recent. I would say the last 15 years-ish of my 56 years on the planet. And I have come to realize that if somebody watching this has not done the work to link what they've become as an adult to what happened to them in childhood, if they haven't done that work and, dug really deep on it, I think that they're not going to have as fulfilling of a life. And it took a lot of deep work for me to understand what motivates me. And I didn't appreciate just how screwed up my childhood was. So my mother, Marie, she wanted a big family, and she's from Hoboken, New Jersey, Italian. And I ended up being the 7th of 10 kids. So she had 10 babies. And it's interesting, in February of 1963, right when she found out that she was pregnant with me, her 7th child, at the exact same time she found out that my 4-year-old brother was given 6 months to live. So he had a rare form of cancer, which, by the way, was curable 2 years later. It's called Will's tumor. But the whole time she carried me, she was going back and forth to chemotherapy and crying. Now, if you think about a 4-year-old in your home, he was the king of the house. He was the light of her life. He was everything. And I have a 4-year-old at home right now, and I know what that's like. Just imagine that. And once she had that diagnosis of Frankie, her life changed. Her future was all nervous breakdowns and in and out of mental institutions. And I don't believe in my life I had a sane conversation with my mother because of this. It was horrible. I didn't realize how difficult knowing that you're going to lose your child could be. But it got really bad. When I was born in October 1963, my brother died 11 days later in the same hospital. And so my mother linked me coming into the world with his death. And My childhood was not pretty. I had all kinds of, I was a cesarean birth, and I've learned that there could be some issues with cesarean birth. I had really severe allergies. I had OCD. I was sick a lot, and I drove my mother nuts, absolutely nuts. And I had a psychotherapist tell me, did something happen in your childhood to make you so driven that you have to prove yourself all the time? I'm like, no, I told this part of the story. And then it occurred to me that whenever I was bad, my mother would scream at me and say, why did God take Frankie and not you? And I called my older sister when I had this revelation. I go, Debbie, did you ever hear Mommy say that to me? And she goes, all the time. I had suppressed that, like completely suppressed it. But my response was some version of, I'm worth it. I'll prove it to you. You know what I mean? So I had this drive that was so unknown to me from childhood. So fast forward a little bit. When I was 11, my dad comes home from work one day. He had been having backaches. And we didn't have a lot of money. He was in the car business, and he's raising all these kids. And he comes home and he says, I've got some news, really bad news. And he was crying. And he said, I've got cancer. And in the first visit to the doctor, they said it's in your lungs, your kidneys, your bones, and your brain. They gave him 6 weeks to live, first visit. And I had an aunt who was into natural cures and stuff, and she got radical. She completely changed the food in the house. And long story short, he ended up living 2.5 years. And in those 2.5 years, he basically set us up for life. And so you have to think about it. We're in North Jersey, right outside New York City. It's the 70s. He died in 1977. We really had no parents after that because my mother was in no shape to raise us. And all of us are married, over 250 years of marriage, no divorces.
Between all the siblings.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And I think there's, like I said, 44 nieces and nephews. I have 44 nieces and nephews when you count the grandnieces. But my point is that when he was dying, I just became a sponge for everything he believed in and what he taught. I went to church every Sunday and prayed a lot. But I'll never forget, after he died, there was a service. And the priest said, it was a big service because we were like a very known family with all the kids. And the priest said, in life, I'm in the audience, and he said, let me tell you a story. And he said, my hope is that one of you here hears what I'm about to say. And I'm like, for some reason, I got this zing, almost like a spiritual zing. I said, he's talking to me. And it was a massive crowd. There was
And you're 13 or so?
It was right after he died. I was 13. And he goes, in life, you could choose to be the horse or the rider of the horse. But whatever you choose, life becomes the other thing. He said, you can choose to become the horse, life becomes the rider, and life will take you wherever it wants you to go. I'm like, that's pretty cool. He said, or you could choose to become the rider, and life becomes the horse, and you could take it wherever you want it to go. And I remember at 13 saying, I'm getting on that horsey. And it was just an awesome experience that despite the fact that we had no money, despite the fact that I had no parents, I had a mom, but there was no relationship really. I just realized at that point, like I could go with my friends who were doing bad things, or I could go this way. And it was around that time that, as luck would have it, I got my first mentor. His name is James O'Donnell. And he's recently passed, but he heard that I was good at math. Now, I'm really young. I was in like 5th grade at the time. So when my dad got sick, I think it was at the beginning of my 5th grade. And when he died, I was in 7th grade. It was at the end of my 7th grade. Anyway, long story short, I had never been exposed to money or entrepreneurism or any of that. And James O'Donnell took me out to lunch one day and he said, I heard you're good at math. I said, okay. He said, if you get an engineering degree like I did, it will train your brain to think. And it will help you in business. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, a business person. You could work on Wall Street. You could do whatever you want, but get an engineering degree. And this is really funny as a young guy. Anytime somebody asked me after that, what are you going to do with your life? I would say, I don't know. but I'm going to get an engineering degree because I could become a doctor, a lawyer, I could work on Wall Street, I could do whatever I want because it'll drain my brain. I literally repeated that. Here's the messed up part about that story. I had one meeting with James O'Donnell, and the meeting was, he told me this, and he said, let me take you to my company. And I'll never forget, I walk in this building, it's got his name on the door, there was all these drafts people. It seemed like hundreds to my young eyes. And they're addressing him, Mr. O'Donnell, and I'm like, wow, I want to be a business guy. And it's funny how people miss those opportunities. They miss as the recipient, and they miss as the giver. One meeting I had with him, it lasted about 2 hours. So let's fast forward. My house was not organized. I never got letters in the mail, but I'll never forget, I was 18, and there was a letter sitting on the stack, on the stack of mail on the TV set, and it said my name on it. I'm like, what the hell was that? And it said from the state of New Jersey. I'm getting emotional thinking about it. And I opened the letter up, and I'm like, unbelievable. If you want something bad enough, the universe conspires to bring it to you. And it said, Mr. Sappio, you got one of the 10 highest scores in your math SAT, and we're going to give you a free ride to Rutgers engineering school. This is unbelievable, because I had no hope. My mother wanted me to work for the gas station on the corner, because she's like, we need money. And this is like one of those searing moments in your life. I can't ever forget it. I was so excited. I showed it to my mother, and she looks at the letter and she goes, "You're not going to college," and rips the letter up. And I'm like, wow, the only way for me to get what I want in my life, I have to break. And I literally just broke. Break away. When I went to college, I was there for 5 years. It was a 5-year program. I never went home. I was there, I built my life there. So my independence skyrocketed. And I have to tell you, it was brutally hard. I went to a public school. I get there, and I had never seen so many Asians or Indians in one place. I remember they did the first roll call, and they got to Raj Patel, and 7 guys stood up. And
you're from a very Italian neighborhood, so that was pretty much what you knew, right?
That's what
culturally.
I knew.
Yeah.
I didn't, and what was weird about it is they curved all their tests. Yeah. So I never saw calculus before. I didn't know what it was. And all these different things that we learned, chemistry, calculus, physics, they had already been exposed to it. And the tests are curved. Mm-hmm. And the first 2 years at Rutgers is this. The third lowest grades, you get booted. Mm-hmm. So 1 out of 3 people got booted. And so it was brutally hard for me because I had never really applied myself. And now I'm just not going to quit. I'm one of those guys, if I'm saying I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So anyway, I go through Rutgers, and what I learned is about myself as an adult now, that I got from childhood, is the immense chaos of my childhood. Just think about all those things and what probably transpired. Forced me and caused me to say, I have to know answers. I need to seek patterns and solutions because I don't ever want to have that chaos. Mm-hmm. So my entire adult life has been all about creating simple systems to live a fulfilling life and to have success. And a lot of those systems have come out in terms of modules and formulas and ways of doing things and things we've trademarked, things like the catalyzing statement. Mm-hmm. But all the 48 modules that became Business Finishing School was all a way to say, listen, if you want an easier way to live your life, Rick, and people that are learning this stuff, there's very easy formulas to live by it. For example, my wife and I in our marriage, we sat down when my wife was pregnant first, and I said, honey, I don't know. Well, I'm going to share a simple one. That's where I'm going. I said, honey, I don't know if I'm going to live past 50. Because my dad died at 50. And she's like, okay, well, you're 45. Mm-hmm. And I said, if we have kids, I want to do for them what my dad did for me. And we created this thing called a family placemat. And on that family placemat is 35 pods of information. It includes our family values. It includes our family rules. It includes what we talk about at family meetings. It includes what my wife and I talk about when we have meetings. It says on there that we're going to have date night every Monday night at 7:30. It has our wedding vows on there. It has our family crest and what it means. It has Ben Franklin's 13 virtues. It's been on our dinner table since the day my son was born. And he has seen it, and have all 4 of our kids have memorized this thing. And it's basically, if something happens to me or mom, here's what we stand for. To me, that's incredibly simplifying, and our kids are thriving. So the 3 operating values that we have in our business and in our family are simplicity, probability, and leverage.
And these are lenses that you look through, which, and this is the whole thing, like, when you talk about, operating values, simplicity, and now that I'm hearing more of your background, because I always know you're like the simplicity guy in many respects. You crave simplicity, you demand simplicity, you force simplicity into existence. And it's not just in your businesses, but also in your personal life, for all the reasons maybe that you just said now that motivated you. So what does it mean to have a lens like that, if you're in a business, to look through it and say simplicity, probability, leverage? Just briefly explain what each of those things mean to you.
So simplicity speaks for itself. We live in a chaotic, complex world, and I like to dumb things down as much as possible, because we can't get things done unless it's simple. And so every time an opportunity comes up in my family or in my business, I'm like, is this going to simplify my life, or is this going to complicate my life? And it's a daily debate. And, an example of that in our family is, we try to go out to dinner with other couples sometimes, and a lot. And they're like, oh, we got to get a babysitter. My wife and I have not missed a date night. A Monday night at 7:30, date night. Now, why do we do that? Because it's simple. Babysitter knows, kids know, neighbors know, employees know, the restaurant knows, because we only go to 1 or 2 places. And it completely has gelled our marriage. And Monday nights, why Monday? Because restaurants are empty, so it's quiet. And you think about those kind of rhythms in all areas of your life. I've been working out with the same trainer for 11 years, 30 sets in 30 minutes, 5:30 in the morning, boom, simple. And you apply those into business, and it kind of creates a lot of automation. We don't have to think about date night. I don't have to think about working out. I don't have to think about a lot of the meetings that we have. So that's simplicity. Probability is an interesting one. I believe that, and there's all kinds of stats on this. There's a great book on The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, where he says more than 95% of what you do and what I do on a daily basis is unconscious. We don't add conscious thought to it. We just do it. And so probability forces you and me to add consciousness to our decisions. And so probability means, if you do something in business, is this going to increase the probability that you hit the stated objective? If you do something in your personal life, is this going to increase the probability of you hitting the stated objective? And people don't think like that. So example I like to use is, your office manager quits. You need to hire somebody quickly. Do you hire the best person you could possibly find in the city? Or do you hire your out-of-work alcoholic sister-in-law? And most people just bring somebody in. They don't think about it. They got to fill a spot, and they destroy their company. But one cool thing, and I brought this up to my wife 1,000 times, I'm driving her nuts. I'm like, honey, what do we want our kids to be when they're 18? And we've laid it out. We want 18-year-olds that are like me and my wife were. Independent, entrepreneurial, able to make money. And so on our placemat, it says, you will never receive an inheritance from mom or dad. We want to teach you how to fish. So our kids are like motivated, even though the oldest is 12. So they're 12, 10, 8, and 6. But anyway, if we want to increase the probability that our kids are those independent 18-year-olds, right? What do? We certainly aren't going to drive them around in club sports and take them to different cities because they're good athletes. No, we're going to teach them the things that they're going to need as adults. So this is an awesome story. I went to the best private school in Dallas that I could find when Luke was a baby, my oldest. And I sat down, and I'll never forget this meeting as long as I live. I said, doctor, how many kids have you graduated in your life? He was about 65, and he goes, thousands. Why? I go, let me ask you a question. The best kids that you have ever had, can you think of a few? He goes, yeah. I said, what did their parents do? And he said, no one ever asked me. That's a great question. And he goes, I have the answer for you. Here's what you do. No TV in the house, no cell phones. Make sure they learn how to play the piano. They have to learn discipline, so put them in martial arts and wrestling. Get a chess coach because it'll train their brain. And have dinner every night as a family. Those were some. There was more, but So I went home. I'm like, honey. And she's like, you're crazy. So here I am looking at you 12 years later. My son is a concert pianist. He's testing for his black belt in karate. He's thriving in school. He also is an incredible rated chess player. And what we realized from all that stuff is, you could read about this in deep work, that what we're actually teaching our kids to do is focus. When you put devices in people's hands and you drive them all over the place, mom has to get on a plane because there's a soccer tournament in New York, the other one has a soccer tournament in California, the family's split apart. We have family dinner every night. I said all that to say, we make decisions consciously to increase the probability of that outcome that we want. So all of us have that. So that's probability.
But from the business side, is that just a question? Like you say, okay, I want to create wealth in my life because that's the theme here, right? Would you look at any decision you're making and say, okay, does this increase or decrease the probability that I can create the wealth I want to create? Is it that kind of that simple?
So I love the way you said it. Here's the bottom line. Everything that we do as business people, we should strive to do things as simple as possible that increase the probability that we have the stated outcome. Now, the stated outcome for me and for people watching here would be to create wealth. Mm-hmm. And use high probability decision making to do that. But oftentimes people use low probability. So this is just an interesting thing. We hear it our whole life. Buy low, sell high. Mm-hmm. But when people buy homes, they look at neighborhoods after they've appreciated. They buy Apple after it's appreciated. They get excited about tulips in Holland after they've appreciated. The name of the game is buy low and sell high. Completely highly probable. It's highly probable, but it's completely against human nature. After the market crashed in 2008, it was devastatingly low. What were individual investors doing? They were running. What was Warren Buffett doing? He was running, except he was running in a different direction. He was buying as much as he could at the bottom. He knows that good markets follow bad markets, and he's just trained himself to, when there's blood in the streets, that's when you buy. So that's a highly probable decision. When you buy a company at a low, whether it's a stock or I don't care what you do for a living, or you buy into a neighborhood at a low, you know that highs follow lows, right? But it's so hard to do. I think about the banking industry, and I'll never forget this story. I don't want to say his last name, but I had a banker in Dallas, Texas. And they were loaning money with 10% down to buy buildings. So 10% down, you buy a $50 million building. You put $5 million down, and they loan you $45 million. Fine. Doing those loans all day long. After the market crashes, he says to me, I wouldn't do a loan on that same building for half the price because a client came in to do that. So they just loaned money at $50 million, but they wouldn't loan money at a valuation of $25 million with 50% down. Like, why wouldn't you do that? He says, because we're a banker. We follow the herd. We're bankers, we follow the herd. It's just, I think bankers kind of train us to think to take risk at highs. Mm-hmm. You follow my logic here? Yeah. If I was a banker and I'm not, I would wait for lows and do loans. Any entrepreneur aggressive enough to put a lot of money down on a commercial building at the market low, I'm in. I want somebody like that. I want somebody who's smart enough and makes decisions in a highly probable way. So,
and you look at this stuff, I think, just in your own business activities. I mean, you have varying funds, the public funds, private funds, private equity funds. So you make investments and you look for these types of things. So this is kind of, you're looking all day long, you're trying to make these decisions. And I know about you too, because if you say, hey, this has got a high probability of success, but the deal's complicated, you don't want it. So like, these things ever wrestle with each other?
Yeah, unfortunately today, and we all see it, it used to be when I was a turnaround guy in my 20s, you take over a company, you make quick decisions, you could turn a business around quickly. Today, unfortunately, something's crept into society and into business that's horrible, and I call it electronic sludge. Mm-hmm. Do you remember 20 years ago, you meet somebody, you want to raise money, you shake their hands, they give you a check the next day. Now everybody's online, they're sending emails and text messages, and they're checking you out, and they're talking to their attorney, and they're waiting for, everything seems to have slowed down. into electronic sludge. So now more than ever, you've got to find deals and opportunities that are simple, because the complexity is growing exponentially, and this electronic sludge is not going away. And everybody sees it, but nobody identifies it as such. And so I think it's more important now than ever. And it's also more important, the guy who wrote the book Deep Work. One of the things that he's concluded is, since money is kind of a commodity, the thing that separates the haves and the have-nots are in business is this ability to focus. 50 years ago, if you had a job, you're working for 4 hours at a time on your job. You're working. Now people are working in 7-second slugs. They start working and then it's bing, 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 bing. So the people that have the ability, the confidence, and the diligence to be hyper-focused in their job for hours at a time, those are the people that are going to make it, because they actually, you can't make progress. You know, the people that are this way: Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a low-tech parent. They did a great interview in which they went to his home to see how many devices he had in his house just before he died, because he had 3 kids. And Steve said, we don't have devices in our house. The iPhone and the iPad wasn't meant for kids. That's the quote in the New York Times. So why is it these titans of industry have figured out deep work, but the average population is mired in electronic sludge? And of course, you have to have Netflix going, and you got to have your Facebook, and you got to have easy access. So this is the divide right now. Those who can focus and who have trained their kids to focus and have trained their employees to focus, and everybody else. And I think it's probably about 1% are in this category. So it leads me to something that I want to share with you. After 2008, when the market crashed, I was scared, because I'm in the fund business, right? All of our assets were way down. And through a series of very fortuitous things, I had the opportunity to meet Boone Pickens, T. Boone Pickens. And T. Boone Pickens was this massive, larger-than-life character. He's a billionaire, unbelievably well-known. When I went to his house, he had pictures all over his house of like every famous person you could possibly meet, including every president. And at one of our meetings, I'll never forget, it was 2007, he gets this call, and he's kind of yelling at the guy. And it was a long call, and he kept calling him W, W, W. And he hangs up the phone, and I'm like, who are you talking to? He goes, oh, that was President Bush. He needed some advice. He's yelling at the guy. So after meeting him, and he introduced me to a lot of very famous billionaires, I spent a lot of time with these people.
You set an agenda to go interview a certain amount of billionaires.
Yeah.
Right? What caused you to want to do that?
Because I was scared. I wanted to interview people that have been through a lot of ups and downs, who were self-made. And I met people like Richard Branson, and I was mentored by Warren Buffett in my 20s. That he wasn't part of this, but here's what I learned about very, very successful people that have been successful in business. And I'll explain it by way of a story. This is a famous story of the guy, the inventor named Dean Kamen. And Dean Kamen is probably the most prolific inventor that ever lived. He invented the Segway. He invented that cool Coca-Cola machine that where you just pick the flavor. But he's had hundreds and hundreds of successful products. And I heard this from somebody who was there, that he was in a meeting 10 years ago. And at the time, he was probably 55. I don't know how old he was. And they're in a board meeting, and he's talking about, the task at hand, and people before the meeting started were talking about Madonna. And he's listening, and apparently Madonna was in front page news, and he goes, I may be the only stupid one here, but who the hell is Madonna? I think that's awesome. If you are so focused on your work that you have no idea about pop culture, I think that's awesome. And people that move the needle on culture and society, from a business perspective, they're just focused. And here's what I learned. Every single person that I interviewed had a very simple life. And I boiled it down to my 5-finger rule for success in business. If you know what your 5 priorities are in life, you move the ball down the field so far. So let me give you an example. I have a friend, I don't want to say his name, but he's famous. And he always says, God first, family second, career third, health and fitness fourth. And I'm like, awesome. He said that all the time. So I was really excited to meet his wife and kids. So I flew out to California one weekend. I was single at the time. And I land, and he picks me up in a limousine. There was weird people in the car with him. We drive to a restaurant, and he's trying to impress me. He got a private room, and there was a lot of alcohol and weird people. Then at the end, we go to a strip club, and he knew a lot of people there. We go home. It's late at night. His wife and kids are asleep. We wake up early in the morning. We go play golf. I hope that you love golf. I don't care. I hate golf. Yeah. I'm not going to do anything for 4 hours chasing a ball around. I personally hate golf. I'm sure the industry is great, and I apologize to you golfers out there. But we play golf all day, and then he goes to another restaurant with another weird group of people, and then Sunday morning comes, and I had to go. I never met his wife. I never met his kids. So let's listen to this. God first, family second, health and fitness fourth, whatever his priority was. What I learned about these wealthy people and these successful people and these people that had massive impact is they only do their priorities. So what I've determined, I've been working on this for 10 years, that my number one priority is being a husband.
But wait a minute, just back up for a second, because it sounds like what his priorities were and what his life were not aligned.
100%.
So what's the point, what's the moral of that story?
So here's the moral.
Okay.
What I realized from him and all these billionaires is my number one priority is being a great husband. Mm-hmm. Being a great father comes after that. Number two, health and fitness. Because if I'm not alive, like my dad didn't treat his body well, he died. Number three is my career and purpose work. Mm-hmm. Number four is my key relationships, like my relationships with business, et cetera. And number five is learning and development. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. If you follow these people around that are crystal clear on their purpose, they get up in the morning at 5 a.m. and you follow them around with a video camera all day long, what you will find is that almost 100% of their waking hours, they're dealing with their priority, a priority. What you find with that gentleman you just asked about, and the vast majority of the planet is, they say, this is my priority, but they spend 90% of the time doing something else. If you want success in business and you want to create immense wealth for yourself, figure out what your 5 priorities are and only do that. That's why Dean Kamen's story is so compelling to me. He was crystal clear on what he had to do when he was awake. Mm-hmm. I read a lot about Roman history, and I don't know if people don't even know this, but the Colosseum in Rome, there was 440 of those throughout the Roman, 440 of those massive Colosseums. Why? Because people just needed to be lulled into unconsciousness. And I think that's what media does. That's what technology does. So it pulls people away from their 5. And the interesting thing about the 5, which I have taught my kids, is where does God fit into all this? Like, who made you? Mm-hmm. Somebody made you. And I put God right in the middle. God's in the palm. But I said to my son when he was 11, he was questioning spirituality. I said, Luke, what's the most incredible thing that was ever created? And he goes, a computer. And I said, okay. What about the human brain? He goes, oh, the human brain. I said, who created that? He goes, a really smart person. So I don't care where anybody is religiously or spiritually, but the most complex organism that's ever been identified, something powerful had to create that. So I put that guy right there.
So you talked about simplicity and probability. You didn't mention leverage. What is leverage and how do you apply it?
So I'm going to talk about leverage by way of a story. Mm-hmm. But leverage to me is when you do anything, it should be leveraging your existing infrastructure or your existing relationships. And in business and wealth creation, I often see people making investments that don't take advantage of what's already in place. So leverage comes in many forms. You could leverage technology that you already have. So oftentimes in business, I see companies, they're going down a path, they have a strategy, and I want to talk about business strategy in a moment, which is big for wealth creation. They have a strategy, but they're doing things over here. And I see this a lot, unrelated, but I see a lot of doctors. They start making money and they decide to buy the building that they're in, and sometimes that works out. But I've seen a lot of times where it hasn't worked out, and it's added so much complexity. If I'm a doctor, what if I leveraged my knowledge of medicine to create a product for the marketplace? So leverage is leveraging existing infrastructure, existing technology, existing relationships. So when I talk about leverage or thinking about a new opportunity, I first say, is it simple to implement this opportunity? Is it probable? Is it increasing the probability that we hit the stated objective? And is it leveraging something that's already in place? I ask those questions. Southwest Airlines, supposedly this is a fact. I have not done the math myself, but when Southwest Airlines went public, the first 30 years that it was public, from like 74 to 2004, it was the best performing stock of all stocks in the United States. An airline, an industry that Warren Buffett used to say is the worst industry in the world, an airline startup was better performing than Microsoft and Philip Morris. You think about that. Why? Because Herb Keller understood simplicity, probability, and leverage. And he employed that in his business strategy. So here's what they did. They took a long time before they started, and they said, how are we going to make decisions in this firm? And they said, we're going to pick a strategy, which is, if you remember at the beginning, it was one plane, the 737. We're only going to do direct flights. There's no seat assignments. There's no change fees, and on and on and on. They had a big focus on their people and their culture. But once they launched, it was permanent for 3 decades. They didn't change. It wasn't until they got massive that they started changing. So an important part about wealth creation, in my view, is having permanence about your belief systems. I'm never going to change simplicity, probability, and leverage. Southwest Airlines said it's permanent. But what happens in most companies? They bring on a new executive, we're going to change this, change that. No, you've got to take time at the beginning. They took 3 or 4 years at the beginning, went through this immense thought process, and then they launched. And here's the cool thing about Herb Keller. He would say, some version of what I'm about to say, he said, the best businesses in the world employ this word, monotony. And you're like, monotony? How is monotony? Monotony is employed by Warren Buffett. He's got a very monotonous life. When a company knows exactly what it has to do, it's monotonous. Everybody knows their role. Everybody knows what they're trying to do. We're just trying to get better and better and better at these short-haul flights. And then once that monotony grows, then it starts expanding slowly, but in a very simple, probable, and leverageable way. When you think about a company, if a company isn't clear about its purpose and its values and its catalyzing statement and its strategy, how does it know if a new opportunity is a great thing or a massive distraction? So until you've done that work to come up with the reason the company exists and how it's going to make its decisions and how it's monotonously is executing on its objectives, if you don't know what those things are, how the hell can you tell the difference between a massive distraction and an opportunity? You can't. So I want to use the story about Jeff Bezos, which I think is really cool. There was a famous cover of one of the big magazines.
Time magazine. His pockets were inside out. Yeah.
His pockets were inside out. It said some version of, Amazon's going bankrupt because Bezos won't change his strategy. His strategy was permanent. Now, I don't know if he articulated it this way, but I believe that a business strategy, which who the hell knows what a business strategy is? But if you're in business, you better have a strategy. And I think, as Jeff Bezos did, it's really simple. What business are you in? When we make investments in companies, we look at 1,000, we make 2 investments. We interview employees. We say, what business are you in? And you get 20 different answers. Jeff Bezos, crystal clear. Sell books, 2 words. When he started Amazon, it was to sell books. So it's what business are you in? So what, who, and how. So that's all. If you have a crystal clear answer to those 3 questions in business, you're going to create immense wealth for yourself. So answering the question, what business are you in? Sell books. Number 2.
Who?
Someone with an internet connection. Everybody thought, you're insane. Only 4% of people have an internet connection in 1994. He's like, we're just going to focus on those people. What do you think about it? We forget. You'll never compete with Borders. You'll never compete with Barnes & Noble. They're going to flush you down the toilet. So what business? Sell books. To who? People with an internet connection. How? We're going to ship them from warehouses because books are small, easy to store. We're going to ship them with fourth-rate mail. So it answers the question of the business model, how you deliver the product, and it also answers how do you market. We're going to market online. So that was their strategy for 10 years. And they burned through billions of dollars. But what happened is, first of all, everybody said, you're crazy because you're never going to be able to compete with Barnes & Noble and everything else. And he goes, if you focus on a strategy long enough, what happens? You add simplicity, probability, and leverage. Why? Because you start building momentum if the strategy is well thought out. And then people start spreading and saying, hey, I got my book on Amazon. And then they start shipping books to their friends because it's easy. And it just spreads. And only when they had mass did he do what? He started adding other products. It's a massive lesson in creating wealth through a business. And here's the cool thing that everybody forgets, in my opinion. Permanence. When my wife and I created that placemat, we said, here it is, it's permanent. When Herb Kelleher created Southwest Airlines, as long as I'm alive, it's permanent. When Jeff Bezos laid out the strategy, it was permanent. And you only add to it, using leverage, things that are taking advantage of existing infrastructure or existing relationships or existing technology. Amazon is a brilliant example of this. But here's the thing, anybody can do this. Anybody can employ a simple business strategy to create wealth. Anybody can make decisions from a simplicity, probability, and leverage standpoint.
So explain what you mean by catalyzing statement. What does that mean?
So I think this whole purpose statement, mission statement, values, all these are all convoluted things. And so we went out and we looked at the marketplace, and what we realized is that the world is too complex. We came up with this term about 15 years ago called the catalyzing statement. And a catalyzing statement is a statement that catalyzes your important stakeholders to help you. Stakeholders are employees and vendors and the marketplace in general. Could be your community around you. So a catalyzing statement massively catalyzes action. And anybody can create a catalyzing statement. And so the story I love to tell is I loved Lovitello's Pizza. It was Lovey's where I grew up. It was the best pizza in town. And all the owner wanted to do was, I just want to go back to Italy. I make it the best of pizza. And this guy worked his ass off and died making pizza. And he was so pissed off when this crappy pizza came along, Domino's Pizza. He doesn't know a damn thing about pizza. And Tom Monahan, who created Domino's, sold the business for more than $1 billion. Why? Because of a catalyzing statement. You could sell crappy food and turn it into $1 billion. And ironically, he's got a bigger estate in Italy than Lovitello could ever possibly have. But here's the thing, 30 minutes or less or it's free. That catalyzed so much action. Why? It catalyzed people who want to drive fast to make tips, who became their managers, talk about leverage. It catalyzed a meme in society, 30 minutes or less or it's free. You think about massive things that have happened in society, impossible things. John F. Kennedy knew there was no way we were going to get to the moon and back. It's not even possible.
And the Russians were kicking our ass.
Yeah, so when he inherited the space program, all it was about beating the Soviets. He created a catalyzing statement. When he said we're going to send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade, what did that do? It catalyzed massive action. The rumor was they got 100,000 resumes for people that wanted to help. And it made decision-making easier. So when somebody came to them with a new technology, is that going to get us to the moon and back in 7 years? No, next. And you think about, there was a crappy car maker called Volvo, and they had expensive cars that weren't really good until an engineer put a stake in the ground. We build the safest cars in the world. And that company turned around overnight, and engineers that wanted to build safe cars came forward. They were a stakeholder. Pregnant mom said, I'm not buying a Cadillac, I'm buying a Volvo. They build the safest cars in the world. It catalyzed all this action. And they went from, I think, like 10th or 13th in the world to 4th. And then what happens? Some CEO comes along and says, "Nah, we're not about safety anymore. We're about performance." They should bounce that guy. But you think about all these ideas. Fred Smith, he got a C on his paper. Federal Express, what did he say? What made you're going to compete with the U.S. government? You're going to raise $100 million in 1975, and you're going to buy 90 planes that ship packages. You're really going to do that? Only if you have a catalyzing statement. What was it?
When you absolutely positively has to be there overnight. I remember it well.
You still remember from 30 years ago. Yeah. So that meme. So here's the cool thing about catalyzing statements. Anyone can create one. And what does it do? It adds simplicity, probability, and leverage to your life. And there's thousands of them. We created a charity because my purpose in life is to inspire entrepreneurship. And I surmise that there's probably about 1 billion homes in the world. And our catalyzing statement became an entrepreneur in every home. 1 billion entrepreneurs. Wouldn't the world be pretty cool with 1 billion entrepreneurs?
And define what an entrepreneur is to you.
An entrepreneur is very simply anybody who takes responsibility for outcomes. You could be a stay-at-home mom whose outcome, that you're pushing probability toward, is I want to create independent kids. And that becomes your mantra.
That's the catalyzing statement for the stay-at-home mom who, in the entrepreneurial context that you have.
So anybody that takes responsibility for outcomes is an entrepreneur. And, the old French definition was somebody who takes resources from one level and brings them to another. If you're a human being that decides to take responsibility, no matter where you are in your life, and you use the resources that you have, and you own those resources, who cares about your childhood or anything else? You're being entrepreneurial when you decide to take responsibility. So that's our definition.
So what's interesting, I think, in summarizing some of this, simplicity, probability, and leverage, catalyzing statement, and you've said this multiple times, and tell me if you truly, truly believe it, anybody can do this.
Anybody can do this. It's frustrating when I run into friends and, they're 11 years in and like, still thinking about my catalyzing statement. And a catalyzing statement is all it is a get to of a purpose statement. Bill Gates is a fantastic example of this. He wanted to build the most recognizable software company in the world in his 20s. And it was going, and he's a good businessman, but he said these famous words and it changed everything. The computer on every desktop.
Yeah, I envision a world with a computer on every desktop.
And he said it over and over and over, and almost going back to monotonous. The really best CEOs on earth are monotonous. They repeat themselves over and over and over. But everybody else thinks success is all about changing and adapting. No, it's about finding your purpose, turning your purpose into a catalyzing statement. Like Bill Gates, he wants to have the most recognizable software company in the world. How do I make it a get to? A computer on every desktop. We're going to beat the Soviets in the space race. How do I make it a get to? We're going to send a man to the moon and return him safe to the Earth.
Before the end of the decade.
Yes. And so the cool thing is none of the things that we've talked about here that have created immense wealth for people, none of them are difficult. They're all relatively simple, but just like dieting, it's relatively simple. Eat less and exercise more. But for some reason, people choose not to execute on that. So I'm hoping that you execute on these simple things.
So this has been absolutely mesmerizing, but I know that you have built, through simplicity, probability, and leverage, a series of principles that you apply to your business activities that you've taught to thousands, tens of thousands out there in the world that people can adopt. Now I want to have a little bit of a lightning round with you because I happen to know what you teach in business, the principles. You and I have known each other for years. We were in an accountability group together. Every week you'd be coming to the phone with these different business principle, and I'd be like writing furiously, oh my God, this stuff is gold. So what you've taught me in the way these principles has had a massive impact on my success, my wealth development, but also on my experience in life. The first one you talk about is values-based decision-making, and then you translate that into what you call the doorman principle. Explain that, please.
Values-based decision-making presupposes that you have a set of values that guide your decisions in business. No one's conscious of this, but just imagine two morons. They don't have a college degree. They decide they're going to start a company together. They're shunned by society because they're both weird. Their names are Steve and Steve. And they built a $1 trillion company named Apple. Did anyone ever think, like, how is that possible? Everybody goes to business school. How did two guys decide how did they do this? And there's a little known story inside Apple that they weren't doing well. They were losing money. And this guy named Markula comes along. It's 1977, and he says, I will invest $250,000 in you. Think about it, $250,000. I want 40% of the company, but every decision from this point forward has to be made according to this list of values. It's called the Markula document. Nobody even knows about it. And when you look at that Markula document, you're like, holy, everything Apple does stems back to a document in 1977. So this isn't hard, folks. If you have a list of values that your company operates from, starting with simplicity, probability, and leverage, and you could go look up the Apple document if you want, magic has to happen after that, because what happens is you're making decisions that are very consistent with a set of values. I know about you, and I know about me, and I know about all you guys watching out there, that every single problem that I have ever had and that you have ever had started when I let someone or something into my life that didn't align with my values.
And I have to say, you said that on the phone to me 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And I rejected the comment when you said, I said, no, that's not true. There's other reasons why I had major problems in my life. And then I started to go back and look at the lawsuits or the challenge, whatever the things were, and every single major challenge I had was because I let someone in my life that did not share my values. It was 100% accurate when I applied it.
And we know scientifically now that your brain rationalizes everything. So let's say you have a clear set of values and you meet somebody, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money, and your brain says, your gut only says yes, no. Mm-hmm. Your gut is G-U-T. Your gut is God uttering truth. And every time you don't listen to gut, every single time, you, me, everybody, every time, it's like, why did I listen to my gut? So what I do with values-based decision making is I have a crystal clear set of values that I make decisions from in my business and in my personal life, and they're imprinted in my gut. Mm-hmm. And to this day, when I get into an opportunity, my gut's screaming no, and I'm like, but. So this is something that you have to be vigilant about. And what did we learn together? That the only way to be vigilant about stuff like this is you can't do it in a vacuum. You have to have accountability. So I met a group of billionaires years ago, now 20 years ago, and they started meeting at the age of 30 when they were just getting along in life. And they met every single week in the basement of a church for 40 years, Wednesday morning, 6:30 in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And this group of 8 men created 4 billionaires. It's crazy. Why? Because of the accountability. So the accountability is when we meet every week is hold me accountable to this set of values, because it's hard to do on your own. So values-based decision making. And where was it born? So I'm 16. Remember, I've got 6 older siblings, and I'm watching the chaos of their lives. I'm watching who they live with and who they married and what they chose to do for a living and their commute times and stupid things like drugs and alcohol. And I'm saying, it's got to be a better way. And that's where simplicity was born, and that's where values-based decision-making was born. It was born when I was 16, when I wrote my first set of values. So as I said, a lot of how I've become in life was born out of my childhood. So here's the thing about values-based decision-making. When you come up with a list of values for your business and for your personal life, you gotta have the accountability. And so there's a built-in system that we've created, and it's in our book, Who's in Your Room, but we call it the doorman. And I imagine that there's a doorman sitting at the room of my life, and that doorman will only let people in that align with my values. So an example of that is last week I was asked to be on the board of a company. And I said, Bob, I am so happy that you asked me, but my doorman won't let me do this. It's like, who's your doorman? I go, he's the guy that holds my values. So I blame it on somebody else. And if I accept this board position with you, I'm honored that you asked me, but if I accept it, I'm not going to do a good job for you, so it's going to hurt you and it's going to hurt me. But you blame it on a third party. So the doorman principle is unbelievable. There was a woman, I'll call her Jenny, 10 years ago now, She was crying. I met her at an event, actually. And she's like literally bawling her eyes out. She just got off the phone with her husband. Her 16-year-old daughter, she had 4 daughters. Her 16-year-old was the oldest. She was dating a drug addict for 2 years. They were robbing from the house. They were having sex in the house. She would not see her own daughter for sometimes a week at a time. Absolutely, positively destroying this family. She's like, what should I do? I'm like, well, you're asking me. I'm not a psychotherapist. And I said, let me just teach you values-based decision-making and the doorman principle. Next time you're with your daughter, sit down with her. Ask her what her values are. Ask her what the values are of the perfect man for her. And then I taught her the doorman principle. So I don't know how long later, 45 days later, I get this freak call from her. She calls me up, she's crying on the phone, and I'm like, oh my God, is she in jail? Is she dead? What happened? She goes, you're not going to believe what happened. I taught her the values-based decision-making and the doorman principle, and she started listing words for her future boyfriend or husband. Honesty, integrity, hardworking, God-fearing, like these words I had never heard come out of her mouth. And I kind of forgot about it. We went on our way, and about 3 weeks later, I'm having breakfast with my husband. And she walks into the kitchen, and no one says a word. And we were scared to even say anything. She goes, Mom, Dad, I broke up with Trevor. And they were like in shock. And the mom goes, why'd you break up with him? And she said, he didn't align with my values. And you think about all that would have been destroyed in their future. One simple conversation, values-based decision-making, built $1 trillion company and saved the family and all the destruction. And it only works if you sit down and write out your values and what they mean to you. And if you can't do that, I won't do that, I can't help you.
So one of the things that you said relative to this that stuck on one of our calls, you said, absent of clear values, one cannot distinguish between opportunity and distraction.
How do you know? If you haven't written out your purpose statements, which you could do in 5 minutes, a purpose isn't out there. It's in here. You peel it away to get to it. And people are looking out there. It's the most insane thing. If you want to know what your purpose is, it's no different than an acorn. An acorn has every single thing it needs to become a giant oak tree. You have everything you need inside of you, but you've got to be willing to peel the onion and go inside. And that's where your purpose lies, and that's where your values lie. I believe in my heart of hearts that your values and your purpose are inside your DNA. But if you're not willing to do the work to peel back and write them out, then I can't help you. So let me just say the quote that we say often at our company. Unless you're crystal clear on your purpose and your values and your catalyzing statement and your main objectives, you have absolutely no ability to distinguish between something that's going to help your life and something that's going to destroy your life. How do you know if you didn't do the work? So
Beautiful. Next, you teach management by objectives. What's that?
So management by objectives is, I love the quote from, I heard him say it too. He's a crotchety old guy now. Sorry, Jack Welch. But Jack Welch used to say, tell me what your quarterly objectives are as a human being and as a company. What are the 5 things you want to get done? Just tell me what they are. Next quarter, what do you want to get done? And tell me what do you want to do as your 5 objectives 20 years from now. If you know what you got to do this quarter and you know what you want to do 20 years from now, the middle takes care of itself. I love that quote because everybody's in this murky world. What do you need to do now that aligns with what you're doing in 20 years? And magic happens. That all presupposes, though, in my opinion, that you've got a purpose for the company and for yourself, and you've got values for the company and yourself. The next step is management by objectives. What are the quarterly objectives? What are the long-term objectives? And each quarter, you sit down with your team and you come up with 5 objectives for the company. Here's the interesting thing. People have a lot of problems with their employees. And I think that all of those problems stem from no clarity on purpose, no clarity on values, and no clarity on objectives. I sit down with my executives and I say, here's where we're going. Here's our company objectives. What are your 5 objectives? And so on a quarterly basis, they get bonused on their 5 objectives. Here's the cool thing. People hate employee reviews. It's the easiest employee review in the world. How'd you do on your 5 objectives? Did you do them? And people say, what about values? Well, the objectives are going to align with the values, right? So it's such an easy, straightforward thing. And it boils down to what we call the 5 ways to pay people. So when small company entrepreneurs come to me, they want to get big, I tell them, look, if you want this to be simple, highly probable, and leverageable to your existing life, then just do these simple things. You don't have to, but here's one of those simple things that we encourage people to do. Pay employees 5 ways. You want employees that are going to stick around for the long haul. So 5 ways. Give people a living wage. So a base salary. I like base salaries. I like benefits. We use PEOs a lot, the professional employment agencies, where they do payroll and benefits. So you get like IBM benefits. So people have a base salary. So when they're going home and they're having dinner with their spouse, they're not looking for another job, or they're saying, I really love where I work because they pay me 5 ways. Base salary, benefits. The third way is a bonus on them achieving their 5 quarterly objectives that align with the company's objectives. The next thing is a company-wide bonus. Everybody gets the same thing. So everybody, if we hit these 5 objectives as a company, everybody's going to get $500 at the end of the quarter, and I'm taking you to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. So everybody's pulling each other to achieve the same thing. And then lastly, something long-term. Something that 10 years from now you're going to get, or employee stock options. But my friend Brett, I love this. On every employee's 10-year anniversary, he bought them a cruise around the world. And I'll never forget, he hired this new employee, Sherry was her name, and I went to his office. I go, hey, Sherry, nice to meet you. And she goes, 9 more years. I'm like, 9 more years? Oh, she goes, I get my cruise in 9 more years. This guy bought 10 years of employee loyalty on a $5,500 cruise. Think about that. But he also paid him 5 ways. And so we complicate this. So I often say CEOs don't have a motivation problem. They have a compensation problem. Because you've all seen the study, 5 million people were studied by Gallup. And what they found is they interviewed employees of companies, and they found that 70% of 5 million people either hated working for their company, were working against it, or were looking for another job, some version of I don't want to work here. 70%. They went back and repolled a small number of them, like 5,000, and they said, this is too bizarre. What would make you go from the 70% that hate your job to the 30% that love it? We want to know what the company stands for. We want to know what the values are. We want to know our objectives. This is simple. Why aren't we doing it?
Next, this is one that really made a big difference in my life: rhythms and rituals to amplify time and success.
So when you think about great companies, they have baked into their culture rhythms and rituals. And oftentimes, people do things once. We're going to do a new member drive, or a new client drive, or a new drive of some kind. Well, if it's the 3rd Wednesday of the month, why don't you just do it forever, the 3rd Wednesday of the month? So now everybody knows, and you bake these rhythms into your culture. Has anybody ever consciously thought about how tens of thousands of McDonald's restaurants get opened by 16-year-olds in the morning and closed by 16-year-olds at night? It's because of the rhythms and habits baked in. And I like to answer this by way of an example. I took over a nonprofit board about 20 years ago. It was failing miserably, and it was last in the world out of 180 offices that did this thing. It's not worth getting into what it was. So I get to the board meeting, and I just put a calendar like 6 foot wide for the whole year on the board, and it was blank, and you could fill it in. And I said, how often do we have meetings for the board? They go monthly. Well, when do we have them? So at the end of each meeting, they would say, when do you want to meet the next one? I said, well, it's Wednesday morning, it's 8 o'clock. Let's have it the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock. Put it on the calendar. When do we want the announcement for that meeting to go out? How about a week before? Put that on the calendar. When are we doing our fundraising? Well, we generally do 4 events a year. Why don't we announce that they're 2 weeks after the beginning of every quarter, 4 times? Put that on the calendar. When are we doing our educational events? Well, we generally do them, once a month. How about the second Tuesday of every month at 7 o'clock? Long story short, we filled the calendar in. I said to the admin, publish this calendar and blow it out to all the membership. This organization in 1 year went from 180th to number 4. Why? Because the rhythm and the calendar ran the company. And great companies do it that way. So you don't have to reinvent things every day. Monotony. It actually became monotonous because the admin team would say, I'm just following the calendar. And so any company could do this. And so that's why we say for this module, rhythms and rituals that amplify time and success. And if you recall, we talked about the billionaires. These guys that were in their 30s that became billionaires. Why? Every Wednesday, 6:30, they knew what chair they were going to be in. My wife and I know every Monday at 7:30 where we're going to be. We're going to be on a date night. We're not going to be talking about business. Why? Because on Wednesday mornings at 8, we have a business meeting. That's when we do all that. So rhythms and rituals to amplify time and success. It works in your personal life. It works in your business life.
So let's maybe kind of tie this all together with the business frame. So, because what you do, you get it down to basically a sheet, I think, right? Saying, okay, if you put together this business frame and you say this over and over again, you just do this work, just the discipline to get this one frame built out, and the probability of a successful business goes way, way up. It's a simple thing. The frame is simple. The probability is high. Highly leverageable, because once you invest that time, you're going to have it, and then you keep running it. Gets monotonous, and that's when people get bored and maybe start to stray off the reservation, right? So just give us the business frame if you don't mind.
So what I'm about to tell you is a very straightforward way that will increase the probability that your business creates wealth for you and your family and for shareholders or whatever you have. And I often say, you don't have to do this. You could follow any method you want, but if you want simplicity, probability, and leverage, here's a good option for you. We once joked the opposite of simplicity, probability, and leverage is chaos, death, and frustration. So any business should have a purpose statement. That's the first step of the frame. And it should be 4 or 5 words. We exist to solve world hunger. A computer on every desktop or whatever. It's just simple. So if you do want to have simplicity, probability, and leverage, you could follow this simple frame. And the first step of the frame is your purpose statement. It's 4 or 5 words. We sell computers. Could be your purpose statement, if that's what you want your purpose to be. It could be a little bit more enlightening, like we cure babies of debilitating illnesses. That's a purpose. But then you get to the catalyzing statement, and the catalyzing statement is what turns the purpose into something that catalyzes action in your stakeholders. And some really good catalyzing statements over the years are, and we've talked about this too, America, land of the free, home of the brave. I think a statement like that is what's causing people to want to come here for 250 years, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight. I envision a world with a computer on every desktop. We build the safest cars in the world. We can go on, but a catalyzing statement catalyzes your stakeholders. Again, every single business on planet Earth could do this, and I've coached a lot over the years. I am not a coach, but people ask me, purpose statement, catalyzing statement. The next thing is, what are your values? What are the 5 or 6 values that you're going to make all decisions from in your business? That's how 2 guys without a college degree named Steve and Steve created a $1 trillion company. $1 trillion company. Values-based decision making. Write them out. The next thing is real business strategy. And your real business strategy is, what business are you in? Really short. We sell books for Amazon at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Southwest Airlines, we fly direct short-haul flights. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. Then the next question is, who do you do it for? Not what your avatar is, it's just who? People with an internet connection. People that take buses in Southwest's case. They wanted to convert people from buses to planes. And then lastly, how do you do it? And the how is very short. We're not talking about a lot of thought. Short. How do you market it? And how do you deliver your product or service? And to use Amazon as an example, their how is, they ship books by 4th-rate mail because it was cheaper, and they market online. So it answers both questions. What, who, how. The next thing is 20-year objectives, your long-term objectives. I don't care. People say this all the time. I want to sell my business in 10 years. Well, great. You're going to sell a business to somebody. They want to know where it's going too. It makes your line of sight better. If you know where you're going to be in 20 years, it helps make decisions for what you need to do now. So the next part of it is long-term objectives. What are the 5 things you want this company to have 20 years from now? And then the last part, and you're done, is short-term objectives. Every quarter, what are the objectives for the business? What are the objectives for the employee? Now, once you have that laid out, and I've taken so many companies through it, it takes a few hours, that's it. They fumble around for 15 years and in a few hours they get it right, just like Markula did with Apple. Here's the cool thing. You then have to wrap this around with, I call it TDE, trust. Only hire people that trust that frame, that believe in that frame. Discipline and execution. You got to have the discipline to follow it, and then you have to execute. And here's the easy part, but no one does it. The very small number of business leaders that do this have unbelievable success. They know what their frame is, and they may have their version of it, and it might not be exactly like that. And then all they do is beat the drum and never stop. They do the same thing over and over and over again. That's why really successful people sometimes are boring. I used to fancy myself a singer, and I sang an open mic night at Caroline's in New York. It was at the height of Seinfeld fame, and I got behind the mic, I sang. And Jerry Seinfeld walks in, and he's not that famous anymore, but at the time he was the most famous TV star, at least. And he trips, and he hey, let me say a few words. And he gets up and he does this 30-minute routine. He burps, teases somebody in the audience, trips, drops the mic a couple of times. It was funny as hell. 2 years later, I'm in Vegas, and it says Jerry Seinfeld in big lights. I'm like, oh wow, Jerry Seinfeld, I'm gonna go see him. So I got a ticket. He did the exact same routine, exactly. Famous people get really good and really deep in what they do well, and they do it over and over and over again. It's kind of monotonous. But if you want to have immense success, figure out your purpose, your catalyzing statement, your values, your strategy, your long-term objectives, your short-term objectives. Put trust, discipline, and execution, and then repeat yourself often. That's success.
Last thing I want us to talk about quickly. You have recently told me you adopted what you refer to as cathedral thinking.
Yeah.
You've adopted it for your company. You've adopted it for yourself personally. What is cathedral thinking?
So cathedral thinking cuts through the heart of everything we're talking about. When you're building a cathedral, you know that you're not building it for yourself or your family. You're building it for people 500 years from now. Mm-hmm. And when you have very long-term thinking, we recently put everything that we do around the 100-year club. When you do things for the long haul, what it does is it informs everything you do now if you do it right. If you have a crystal clear picture, a legacy of what you want your business or your life to look like 100 years from now, what it does is it changes how you do things today. So if I want to live to be 120 years old, it's going to inform what I put in my body today. And there's an incredible story. Pastor Loritz, African-American guy in Atlanta. I'll never forget the story he told. And I might not get all the facts right, but it was just an incredible story. I was crying hearing him tell me this story. His great-grandfather was a slave. His great-grandfather couldn't read or write. And after the Civil War, the slaves were freed. And this guy said, I don't ever want any of my offspring to ever have to go through what I went through. And he wrote a family legacy document. He said, if you're in our family, you are going to get a college degree. You're going to be really careful who you marry, so you're going to have a list of the attributes of the perfect spouse. And you're going to be a really good business person. And this guy has 300 offspring as a result of that one document with no divorces and a college degree, because he used cathedral thinking to create a legacy. And this was an illiterate slave in his 40s. And I believe that those who embrace long-term thinking, when you do that and you have a crystal clear image of where you want to be and where you want to go, it makes today easier. It makes it easier to employ what we're talking about, simplicity, probability, and leverage. When I first married my wife, She thought I was crazy, but I wrote something out and I said, it's 2070, it's April 17th, we're in a log cabin, there's a fire over here, we're sipping hot chocolate, our great-grandchildren are playing outside. And it was very clear where we were going to be 50 years from now. So what happens when we have a fight? We're not running for the exits. We're crystal clear where we're going. And you can use this very simple thing for anything, just like this slave did. Here's where my family's going to be in 300 years. Here's where my marriage is going to be in 50 years. Here's where my kids are going to be. And I'm going to ask you a question. What are your kids doing in the year 2065? And most people say to me, I have no idea. Well, my wife and I know because we helped them write it out.
I know this all to be true because I know you, and it makes me really emotional because it's got such a beauty to it about what life is really all about, and you make it really simple. It's
Thank
just
you.
the question is, and I know your frustration is, why don't people just do the simple things to have an extraordinary life? And to me, that's the wealth breakthrough. If you want to, live abundantly, you want to live wealthy, you want to not only generate monetary value, but you want to enjoy the life that goes with it.
I'm glad that you said it that way because people often say, you never talk about money. This is the best kind of wealth because by living this way, you're generating all kinds of money, not only for yourself, but for charities you support. So at the end of the day, it creates immense wealth. It creates wealth in people's hearts, in their families, in their homes, in their businesses. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful purpose. Thanks for sharing it all. And I know that you've touched a lot of people's lives right now, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike Dillard is not only a serial entrepreneur, he's a serial thinker. He's someone that has great perspective and context on things, and we're excited to be able to share this interview with you that I did with Mike Dillard that's going to enlighten you on a lot of subjects, including cryptocurrency, investment in gold, and other such things. But Mike has had not only the abstract understanding, but the personal experience in these realms, and I'm happy that we can share this with you because I think it's going to teach you something that can make a big difference. Mike, you have such a great reputation. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, so thanks for making the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
So let's talk about maybe just your entrepreneurial journey and background. How'd you get started in being an entrepreneur?
Oh gosh, that goes back to my days in high school and waiting tables at the original Macaroni Grill in Vernon, Texas. Yeah, which was the same building as the original Rudy's Barbecue. And I used to mountain bike race competitively, and I needed money to fund that, so I'd bus tables at night during school. And I really earned an appreciation for the lack of freedom that comes with having a job. And the fact that I'd miss out on a lot of good times with friends on the weekends. And I'd come home at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, exhausted, smelling like food, and would head back home to my parents' house, turn on television that late at night. And there's really only one thing on at 1 a.m. back in those days, which was infomercials. So watching Tony Robbins and Carlton Sheets and all of those guys, and that really just exposed me to the fact that there was other options available and options without limitations, which really appealed to me. So it was a natural fit, but that was the inspiration, and started playing with, starting little businesses way back in high school and college, and that's where I got my start.
What'd you study in college?
First semester was biology. I was going to be a dentist because at the time my uncle was the most successful, wealthiest person in our family tree. And I was like, okay, if I have no other interests, that seems like the smartest thing to do. Immediately found out what beer was when I showed up to the dorm, because I never drank in high school since I was cycling. And my first semester I got a 1.3. So immediately changed plans, and I went to summer school on probation, switched over to marketing, and did well there, but I honestly never went to class. I went to Barnes & Noble, and I'd sit in the business section reading books on the floor, skipped all of my classes, and then I would go pay $50, $60 to go to the cram sessions, 3 days before, you get all the old tests.
Right.
And that's what I did for 5 years until I passed with a 2.0. And my theory on that was that I went to class as much as I need to and not a minute more. So I already knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so the degree for me was kind of pointless. So,
What did you do when you got out? So what was your first business venture?
first business venture was in the network marketing industry, and this is Web 1.0 days. This is early 2000s, 2000, 2001. And at the time, this is pre-social media, no YouTube, Facebook, pre-MySpace. But I had a mentor that had been working with me over the phone for about a year, named Stu, out in California. And I said, Stu, I'm packing up my truck after I graduate a week later, and I'm coming to learn from you until I figure this out. And
How did you find Stu? I mean, how did he come into your life?
Probably through the network marketing business I was in at the time. And so that's what I did. I packed up my old Chevy truck with everything I owned from my dorm, said goodbye to the folks, drove to California, got to San Diego where he was, and realized I could not afford anywhere in San Diego, so I kept going to Temecula, found a $300 a month apartment, had my bed, my desk, and a chair, and that was it. And the living room was full of boxes from my memorabilia and college stuff. And that was September 10th, 2001. So the next morning,
Wow.
I got a phone call from Mom, freaking out. And that was a big change in plans, because at the time, if you're selling opportunity, if you're selling hope, if you're selling a brighter, better future, and all of a sudden the world changes overnight, that's not really something that people are in the mood to talk about at the moment. And so our plans at that time really took a dive, got a job at Best Buy selling computers there in Temecula for probably 3-4 months. Couldn't pay the bills at $7 an hour, $8 an hour, whatever I was making, and eventually headed back home to Texas. And it was a tough lesson learned, but interesting timing. And yeah, so that was the first venture.
So maybe just as now with the reflective wisdom after being through this, the role of a mentor in the development of being an entrepreneur, and the role of timing where things happen, because you're also on the heels of the .com bubble burst, right? So that kind of process, then 9/11 happened. So how timing might influence your plans.
Timing is interesting because it can throw a wrench in a certain set of plans, and it can create opportunities in different ways if you have the skill sets to capitalize on that. And at the time, I didn't have any skills. I was still trying to figure it out. So I don't think at the end of the day it would have made a difference either way, because I just didn't know what I was doing. But I think the determination was the biggest piece of the puzzle. And I really made up my mind at that point that I was going to become an entrepreneur. I was basically going to die trying. I'd planned when I couldn't make rent or pay my cell phone bill one month. I was like, okay, I can get a gym membership. I can take a shower there. Maybe I can find an air-conditioned rental unit, and I'll sleep there, and then I'll figure it out. And that's where my thinking was going. There wasn't any plan B or idea of quitting. So
what's interesting is that a lot of people might have reacted in that circumstance by saying, well, I guess I'm not meant to do this, the way things unfolded, which the meant to be thing is, I always find that to be a confusing premise. But in your case, it was like you weren't dissuaded, by the circumstances. You were still going to work to go through them. What do you think the compulsion was? I mean, because this is really the heart of an entrepreneur, isn't it?
The idea of having a job and giving up on everything I wanted to do in life was infinitely more painful than living in a storage unit.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was it.
That was it, just that simple.
Yeah.
So then what unfolded from there?
Gosh, moved back to San Antonio, got a job briefly in Dallas recruiting surgeons. The biggest piece of advice I ever got was a mentor in that industry at the time, and I'd gone on for 5 years and failed, didn't make a dime for 5 years in a row. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, something's got to change here. And he finally gave me a really good piece of honest advice. And he said, Mike, the reason you're not hitting your financial goals in this industry is because you're not capable of getting the result that you want. You're not that person right now. And you've been chasing these opportunities, if you will. And I put all the responsibility for success on something outside of myself. Either it was the business or the product or the marketing materials, but I thought success was going to come as a result of those things. And it finally dawned on me when he said that. He said, if you want to go make, let's say, $50,000 a month, because that was my big lifelong dream at the time, he's like, you have to become a person who's capable of achieving that. And he's like, you're not right now. You're not. You don't have any mastery of any skill sets whatsoever. And I was like, okay. And it was a big light bulb moment for me. So from that point forward, I dove in headfirst into every book I could find on sales, marketing, lead generation, and copywriting specifically. I was very shy at the time. I hated talking to people in person and selling. It was just the scariest thing in the world for me to do, even over the phone.
Right.
So I learned how to sell via writing, via copywriting, and it took me about a year and a half of just going into every course I could. And I'd sit down at night and print out successful, sales presentations and letters from some of the greats like Dan Kennedy or David Ogilvy and guys like that. And I would just rewrite them out by hand. And I did that every night for about a year. And I learned that skill set. And all of a sudden, I was like, man, I can really sell something here. And then I taught myself how to use Google AdWords. And now how do I get eyeballs in front of what I've written? And that really changed everything. I applied that skill to my network marketing business at the time, started recruiting people for the first time ever, built a team pretty quickly of about 300 or 400 people, and realized I absolutely hated it. This was like 5-6 years of pursuing this dream, and I finally have it, and I figured it out, and it was miserable. It just wasn't a part of my personality, being a really introverted person.
Right.
So that was another big chapter where it's decision point. Do I give up on this dream of building a business in that industry for 6-7 years now, or do I stick with it? And the solution or the answer that I came up with was, what if I could build this business in a way that I really enjoyed? And for me, the answer was to that was just, how do I get people to call me instead? How do I stop chasing people, and how do I get them to come after me? And there was just a little twist, at the time to doing that, which is providing value. If you put out value into the world, surprise, surprise, you help other people, they want to work with you. And essentially there's this whole attraction marketing philosophy that I happened to introduce to that industry at the time. So this was 2004, 2005. And no one in that world had ever heard of that. They'd never heard of online lead generation. They'd never heard of building a business online. They never heard of attraction marketing. And I ended up writing this little 50-page training manual for my team at the time that kind of talked about those philosophies and strategies. And all of a sudden I had phone calls from people all over the world saying, hey, can I sell this manual to my team? Can you make one for our team? So I ended up selling it for $40 a copy online. I'd go down to Kinko's, I'd have 300 printed at a time, little cheap spiral binding for $2-3 a piece. Put up a sales letter for it, put it on Google, and within, I think, 3 or 4 months, I was selling around $50,000 a month worth of that book. And that was an even bigger shift, because now I really felt like I was pursuing my talent and what I was good at, which was teaching. And I'd really discovered that. And so that really turned into an education company where we took the skills, which were brand new of online marketing, and taught it to that industry. And that turned into an 8-figure business. So.
Wow. So it's interesting because it seems like, and maybe this is an important foundation for an entrepreneur, is they have to know themselves really well to be able to kind of keep moving forward, where you said, geez, I got what I wanted and I ended up hating it. So you said you had to learn things about yourself.
Well, in the beginning, you're just like, tell me what to do. Put me in, coach, and I'll do whatever you say. And that's what I did, for those 5 years. And I was like, okay, this isn't working, and I'm miserable. What's got to change? And interestingly enough, that industry is built for people who love networking. They are extroverts. They love meeting people, talking to people. And you stick someone like me in there who shrinks in that environment, and then expect to see success. Yeah, it's an uphill battle for sure. So yeah.
So if someone were to ask you, so what do you do for a living? How would you describe it?
Previously I've really just considered myself an educator in the fact that I tend to build companies based on my own personal challenges. So whatever my biggest challenge is in life, I'll go work on the solution and figuring that out for many years until I do, and then I'll teach other people who have that exact same problem what I learned. And that's really been the heart of what I've done for the last 12 years in 2 different companies. Now we're, with that, I've been challenging myself in new ways to, push myself as an entrepreneur in general outside of that realm, which has been an interesting learning experience as well. So.
Yeah. Well, recently you've been writing a lot of great copy, because I've been reading it around cryptocurrency. What got you attracted to that?
You know, I don't remember exactly what caught my eye, but I found Bitcoin in 2012. I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013 on Mt. Gox. 2012 was a little too sketchy. You'd get on these forums or blogs and it would be, send this anonymous person your credit card info and money and they'll send you this Bitcoin back. And at that time, you know, it was probably pennies, fractions of a penny. So unfortunately, my radar went off a little too late, or a little too soon, I should say. But 2013, I set up an account on Mt. Gox and bought 500 Bitcoin and just was like, hey, if nothing happens, great, Vegas money.
Right.
If something does happen, great. And unfortunately, a year later, Mt. Gox got hacked and I lost all my Bitcoin.
Oh my goodness! Oh wow, that's real unfortunate.
Yes, yeah. So I paid attention to the industry a little bit. I think I bought back in when Bitcoin was about $700 in 2015, 2016. I don't remember the exact date. And started to notice what was going on with Ethereum as well when it was about $5, $6. And at that point, I really started to dive into that industry in a pretty big way. And I saw what was going to come from that in the next 10, 15 years pretty quickly. So,
was there something about it, sort of, either spiritually or philosophically, that you said, "Wow, the idea of a non-government controlled currency intrigues me"? Is that one of the things that brought you there?
Yeah, well, for sure. I was buying gold in 2006, 2007. Buying silver, when it was $7, saw the writing on the wall with the financial collapse, and for anyone who was studying economics and finance at that time, we should have seen the entire thing collapse.
Right.
And it took trillions of dollars in money printing to, prop it up and keep it alive. So I've always had a bit of distrust around people in power who have control over an unlimited bank account and credit card, and we're the ones who end up paying the bill. So yeah. So
now, now that you've seen all the things unfold and things continue to unfold, it's a fascinating world, the whole cryptocurrency and blockchain world. What do you see moving forward? What do you think is going to happen?
It's really interesting. There's two sides of it. There's the truly decentralized currencies like Bitcoin that basically cannot be controlled. And the real evangelists, the maximalists, if you will, of that world, think that that's going to take over the world and become the de facto global currency. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That'll require mass adoption. So what I've been most interested in following is how our government, specifically the US, is going to react.
Right.
Because you're not going to see mass adoption if they come out like China did and say crypto and Bitcoin's illegal.
Right.
You'll get pirates and rebels who will use it, but if you can't buy Starbucks with it, it's not going to reach that point. So following what the SEC's done and the policies that they've put out over the last year specifically, they're looking to blend the two. And I don't know exactly how that's going to work out, but the genie's out of the bottle at this point. What really excites me the most, I guess, is the tokenization of securities and real physical assets. I think that's where the real revolution is going to take place here in the coming years, when anyone can take their business or a house and tokenize the value and pull out the equity. That's going to be game-changing.
Walk through what that means. So you have a house, you got equity in it. What would it mean to tokenize it?
Well, at this point, if you want to essentially raise money, for your business, let's say, your biggest option outside of taking private funding is to take it public.
Right.
Which is basically impossible these days unless you're a billion-dollar company, right? So that door has been closed, and now essentially you're going to be able to take any real asset you have, again, your business, your gas station, your home, your bed and breakfast, whatever it may be, divide it up into shares, assign those to a token, and then share those on an exchange or let people buy them, invest in them. You can take quarterly profits and automatically distribute those based on a per token basis to everybody's wallet who owns it. And it can be as fast and as simple as that.
So basically, the token becomes your stock or your equity that you're selling into a public marketplace that people can invest in.
Yeah.
And now you're starting to cite the whole, well, how's the SEC going to look at this? Because they kind of, there's regulation around securities and who can offer them and how they're offered, et cetera. So what's the current status of that as far as the SEC is concerned?
I think it's going to be treated the same way as stock. Anybody can jump on E-Trade and buy stock right now. The difference is what assets can you turn into stock, basically, and how easily can you do that? And that's really where the big change is going to take place. So lots to figure out yet, but I think that's going to be game changing.
Is there an emerging business of people that would say, hey, I'm going to do the picks and shovels of this thing, where I'm going to create the platforms for people to tokenize? Because the chance person who says, hey, I want to raise some funds and I want to use this vehicle, I mean, how do they do it? So obviously, the trading platforms need to be built. Is there a movement underfoot to do that?
One of the guests of this movie, Patrick Byrne, and T0.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I've been following T0 since he's announced that, and obviously Patrick and I have a lot in common philosophy-wise when it comes to money. So I'm very excited about what they're doing.
And what role do you want to play moving forward in all this?
The role I've taken right now is to help introduce people to what cryptocurrency is about and how to participate safely. At this point, it's still the Wild West. I still see friends on Facebook, oh my God, my phone was hacked and my wallet was hacked and my Bitcoin's gone. Wow. And these are smart people. These are entrepreneurs. This is not mom and dad, 70 years old, trying to figure this out. And that's just a huge issue right now. So the role I've taken is, here's what cryptocurrency is, here's what crypto assets are, here's how they work from a layman's perspective, and most importantly, here's how you store them safely and transact safely. Even you look at the infrastructure we're dealing with right now, and outside of Coinbase, you're dealing with My Ether wallet and all of these other tools that, unless you're an engineer, software engineer, or programmer, you're going to have a tough time trying to figure out just how to use it. And so right now I'm trying to serve as the guide around that stuff and get people involved while the timing's right.
So it's still education in essence, right? So now just pointing your educational prowess toward this as compared to some of the other things that you've done before.
Yeah.
It's interesting, as you mentioned that, is that I got very excited about Bitcoin and crypto when it first came out because of my own philosophy towards money. And I just wanted to morally support it and hoped it had a future. But what you say, and this is why it's a real need. I mean, I come from, my last business was a technology business. So I'm not a tech adverse. I'm really tech, oriented. And when I looked at what it meant to try to purchase Bitcoin, this is back probably when it was trading around $600 or so. I think and I said, I'm going to go get some of this, just to morally support it. And also, I think it's a cool thing, and I think it might actually do something. We'll see. But by the time I really started to look at what does it take to purchase it, what does it take to have a wallet, what are the risks, how do you have to securitize? For me, it seemed so complex and difficult that I said, I can't imagine adoption at this point because, I'm somebody who's kind of tech oriented and, the average Joe is just not going to be able to weather this.
As long as you're expecting people to scan QR codes and copy and paste public keys, you're not going to see it.
Right.
And one of the projects that I follow is all about putting the visual layer, if you will, on top of the blockchain. So everything is in the form of, a graphical asset basically, and you don't see the code anymore. If you want to send someone an asset, you just swipe it or text them, this little digital icon, and that's it. And it's a digital asset at that point. It can't be copied, duplicated, and you own it. We're going to see an entirely new world of assets represented with these. Might be a can of Coke at the store downstairs. Well, I have one on my phone. Represents a real can of Coke. I can go up to the machine. I can make that transfer, and out comes a real can of Coke, and the digital version's gone. And it's going to be a really neat future here, but we're just now going through the ideation phase of what it could be. So,
and I think that's going to be the tipping point when it gets kind of consumer friendly in that respect. The adoption, I think, will be exponential at that point.
Yeah, once you're using blockchain without knowing that you're using blockchain is when frankly the opportunity is over.
Yeah.
So right now, the more complicated it is for people, which is what I tell them, the fact that this is difficult and hard means that there's an opportunity here. So,
Well, were you surprised, like when I first was seeing this, that the government stayed passive? Because as you said, the genie's out of the bottle now. I thought the government would try to clamp down on this so quickly because the government control of currency is a major foundation of why the government thinks it exists.
right.
And then suddenly it was out and they were doing nothing. Was that surprising to you?
Yes and no. And I've had a lot of conversations with some really smart friends about this because I still don't understand why either. And, so the global crypto market cap, the entire asset ecosystem around the world is less than $300 billion today. That's around the market cap of Walmart. So I don't think they're paying attention to it, or at least they weren't initially because it was just small in a fringe application. But I also don't think that they could get anything accomplished quick enough anyway. Does anything move fast in Washington?
Yeah.
It takes years.
Right.
And this is moving faster than any other technologies developed. The adoption is moving faster than anything else. And so even if they wanted to, I don't think that they would practically be able to make it happen. And so there have been a lot of smart entrepreneurs like Patrick who've been out essentially lobbying and educating Washington and saying, look, this is here. It's not going away. So now we have two options. Do we become this center hub of development and innovation as we were for essentially the first internet applications?
Right.
Or do we let that go somewhere else, to Singapore or South Korea or somewhere else? And I think they're smart enough to know we want the brain power and we want the assets here in the U.S. So I think that's the way that it's going to go.
Certainly a compelling argument, saying, hey, this is out there and now who's going to take the lead?
Right.
Yeah. Now, what about the wider application of blockchain, beyond, a currency, but, what else it can do in the world? What are you seeing?
Well, beyond a currency and around the tokenization of securities, it really is it just comes down to people. And there's going to be two different types of applications. There's a truly decentralized application, which takes people out of the process. And it's funny, I have a very smart entrepreneur friend here in town who is not a fan of Bitcoin or blockchain. And he's like, I know it's going to get hacked. I know people. Someone's going to come in and corrupt it. Mm-hmm. And it just told me that he doesn't really get it, because you buy Bitcoin and use crypto because you don't trust people and you don't want people involved in the process.
Right.
So, I think the big piece around this is Bitcoin is creating a trust-based economy. It's taking inefficiencies that are created in any market by fraud, theft, obfuscation, and deceit, mm-hmm. and it's going to get rid of that. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, the big transformational piece of this. You look at, from myself as a business owner and using merchant services, and I'm paying 3-4%, merchant fees to Amex and Visa and MasterCard and Stripe and everybody else. And now I can take payments via crypto for a fraction of a penny.
Right.
Yeah, I'm in. So it's really going to be interesting to see how those companies start to adopt as well. I know many of them, Visa specifically, has been filing dozens and dozens of patents around cryptocurrency, and while at the same time, talking it down and all of that stuff as well. So,
well, smart people, what they do, exactly that. They're going to hedge their bets on the threat, right?
Yeah.
Saying, hey, this is nonsense and inappropriate, but at the same time, they've got patents. I know that a lot of companies. Well, you mentioned Walmart. I think Walmart's got a bunch of patents on crypto, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's been interesting to see how people are scrambling right now to try to position themselves for this, because it's on a tear that I think it's almost dizzying as far as how fast things are unfolding.
Yeah, luckily right now this is the calm before the storm, post bubble in 2017, and it's a huge opportunity. We're still really, really, really early in this. I think it's gonna take another 5 to 10 years before 80% of the population is using it like their Visa card. So yeah, we're super early still.
And so do you think we're in another bubble now? And if there was an economic bubble that was going to burst, what do you think is going to happen to cryptocurrency when that with that?
I think the U.S. stock market is entering a bubble for sure. Mm-hmm. When you're hitting all new highs every month, every week, mm-hmm. you're in a bubble.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be really interesting to see how crypto reacts when that pops. Is that money going to go into Bitcoin, or is it just going to go into cash and stay there? And I don't know the answer to that. I view Bitcoin as digital gold, as a lot of people do right now. And so, yeah, it's going to be very interesting, and I don't have the answer, but I know what I'm betting on.
Yeah. And with that, do you think, because you mentioned Bitcoin, what about all, I mean, there's, I guess, over 1,000 or thousands of cryptocurrencies now. Do you think the market's over flooded with them and it's going to be a washout, or what's going to happen there?
95% of them will be gone in a couple of years. And, that's great. I think all of the ideas and innovation are necessary. It's going to find its value in an open marketplace, and the winners will stick. But 95% of them will end up just like the dot-com days. The question is now, which do you invest in? And unfortunately, just like in the dot-com days, you don't know. So at least my philosophy has been over the last couple of years to put a little bit of money in all of them, at least the top 50 to 100 that are out there. And the big piece for me is this going to replace an existing market or business or function that exists right now that has a really large user base? Is this going to allow that to be done faster, easier, and more efficiently? There's a lot of applications out there that are brand new ideas. Let's tokenize the dental records industry. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Put a couple $100 in it, maybe $1,000 in it, Vegas money.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think all of those are going to go away. At the end of the day, a blockchain is a database, and the real value of a blockchain is a distributed one, but most of them are not. They're centralized.
Right.
And at that point, you just need a database. Use Google, use Microsoft, SQL, whatever you want. You don't need a blockchain for it that's distributed and being used around the world for that functionality.
Well, what's interesting is that typically if you're like looking to invest in equities or even to speculate into markets, there's some fundamentals, like if you're going to the .com, pre-bubble, you'd say, okay, well, who's the team, right? That that's doing this. Jeff Bezos. He's running Amazon. I kind of think he's got his act together. Blah, blah. You have certain things to grab onto to say, I'm gonna do this research to make my investment. Here, it's a little bit more abstract, right? As far as how do I pick which coins?
90% of the websites I've seen for these applications, and I'm somewhat educated around this space. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give myself a solid 4 or 5. But I'm not on the engineering side. But you go to the website, and it's just all of this tech jargon, and that tells me that they're not in touch with solving a mass consumer problem. They're in touch with building something that they think is really cool.
Right.
And that's not really an asset that I want to invest in. So.
Wow. So now if people are out there saying, okay, I'm not a sophisticated investor, but I kind of do the traditional stuff, but this is interesting to me. What's the path they would take to try to say, okay, I need to get up to speed to be able to properly invest here?
Yeah, buying it today is easier than ever. There's the Cash App, there's Coinbase, which is super easy. And so I think that's becoming more and more accessible. At this point, it's how do you use it safely? So there are just a lot of sophisticated scams out there where even if you take some really good security steps and you set up two-factor authentication on your phone, but if you do it via SMS text, let's say, where you get a text back and you have to enter in your code, right, to verify your login. There are employees at these phone companies that are paid for and bought by the crooks. Wow. And they'll switch out your SIM card, give your number, control of your phone number to the crook for 5-10 minutes in order for them to get that authentication number, switch it back, and you wake up and your crypto's gone.
And there's no way to recover it at that point, is there?
No.
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah. So, there are just pieces around like that people need to get educated on. We're seeing the big next wave here is going to be with the introduction of essentially, Wall Street institutions into this industry. We're seeing Bakkt launch this year. We're seeing the...
What is that?
Backed is a joint venture, I believe, between Microsoft and a couple of other really large Fortune 500 companies to bring institutional level infrastructure to crypto. And a part of that is insurance, right? So nobody's going to put in pension fund money into anywhere if it's not going to be insured against theft.
Right.
And so all of those pieces of infrastructure are being put in place right now this year. And I think once those come online and they get approval from the SEC, that's when you see this turn into .com.
Yeah.
.com days in a really big way. And for me, this industry, and I just tell people straight up, it's speculation. We are speculating, we're gambling, and our odds are really, really good. But at the same time, more than anything else, you have to have an exit plan on what you're going to do with your potential gains. If we see another 100x move, what are you going to do with that money? And I think that's a really important question to ask as well. And it's just also really important for people to understand that this is unbelievably risky right now. Yeah. It is super early. And so making sure that you don't invest money that you can't afford to lose is a huge, huge part of this. And I think a lot of people unfortunately learned that lesson in 2017.
Yeah.
So
for you, do you see yourself focusing mostly in this area for the foreseeable future as far as your business activities?
No. The focus for me really remains around entrepreneurship. I think that's my biggest point of value in what I can offer people, because that's where I've learned the most lessons during my career. I think making people aware of crypto and the basics is a role that I can play, but it's not my field. I think I have a talent for taking complex subjects and communicating them to other people in a simple manner, which is helpful to a large group of people. But that's my role.
So, well, let's go back to that for a moment, because you almost became a dentist, or at least had an interest early on, because, as you said, the most wealthy person in your family tree was a dentist. Let's say somebody actually went and did that, and now they've practiced for 25, 30 years, and they said, I can't do another decade or two of this. I want to become an entrepreneur. I've saved some money, so I'm not starving and going to live in a locker. But but I now want to make a move. What do you think in today's world the best move is for somebody like that?
It comes back to skill sets. It comes back to, it's not about your idea. It's not about how much money you can plow into it. It's about your skill set. And for me, the primary skill set is on the sales side. You can have a phenomenal product. You can be a world-class engineer. If you can't sell either your backers from an investment standpoint, or your team from a hiring standpoint, or at the end of the day, your customers, it doesn't matter. So my biggest piece of advice around that is understand what your skill set is and how that can be applied in a way that'll help grow a business and generate revenue. Revenue is the lifeblood of a business. A business gets unbelievably stressful if money's not coming in the door, especially if you start to build a team and your expenses get up there. So that to me is skill set number one. Until you have that, don't worry about it. Go learn how to sell, how to market, how to generate leads, how to generate traffic. Once you can do that, the world's your oyster. You can do anything, because you can apply that skill set to absolutely anything in any industry that inspires you. And that's really the key to success these days. And I don't know of a single entrepreneur who has had success without learning that and acquiring that skill set either at one point or another. It really has served as the foundation for all of us. So,
do you have dispositions toward real estate versus buying a franchise versus trading the market?
One of the biggest lessons that I've learned is when I was young, I always remember asking myself, where's the greatest point of leverage?
And what would that mean when you say greatest point of leverage?
Yeah, where's the greatest point of leverage? Where's my goal? And so back in the network marketing industry, this is what I was thinking about. I'm like, okay, I'm a distributor, and I'm building maybe a network of people who might consume the products or might sell them as well, but my point of leverage is their activity and their consumption. So I might have a group of 300 or 400, 500 people below me who are buying products, or maybe they're building a business as well, but that's my point of leverage off of their activity. Well, what's the next level up of leverage? It's the company owner, right? They're getting paid on everybody's activity and consumption. Where's the next point of leverage from there? Well, maybe it's as a software company that is serving all of the network marketing companies. Maybe it's providing merchant services to them. Maybe it's providing, customer management software, accounting software, whatever it may be. Where's the next point of leverage up from that software company? Well, it's probably the bank who's providing them liquidity and funding, right? So same with real estate. If you were going to get into real estate today, if you're starting out, maybe you're going to be an agent and you're going to go sell homes. And at that point, you're a really hardworking salesperson, but there's no leverage. So what's the next level up? Well, maybe you own the brokerage that has 10 agents. Fantastic. You look at Keller Williams and what they're doing, multi-billion-dollar real estate company, I think top 3 in the world. And I've had lunch with Gary a couple of times, and Gary's in a great point of leverage. He's got 150,000, 200,000 agents underneath him, basically making him money every day. And so after that, where's the greatest point of leverage? Again, it's the banking system. It's providing the mortgages and the loans for all of these homes that are being sold. So a question that I would ask yourself whenever you're thinking about starting a business, you're not going to be able to start at that top, at that greatest point of leverage, but what is it? And at least think about it.
Right.
And to me, that would be my goal, is to one day end up there at that point, because that's the difference between making, $250,000 a year and $250 million a year. But at least be aware of it and look for it.
So leverage basically be defined as getting things done through other people.
Sure.
Yeah. So and I think that was a great stair-stepping example, saying, hey, if you're the salesperson, you're hustling all the time, and you eat what you kill, as compared to saying, now I got other people hunting for me,
right?
And they all feed a piece up to upstream.
And those are two different skill sets. Making that transition has been the hardest one for me to make, and it typically is for most entrepreneurs. The skills that'll allow you to make your first $1 million, essentially sales, is completely different when all of a sudden you can no longer sell and you've got a team of 10, 12 people that now have to take over that role and responsibility, because you developed a lot of skill and talent and nuance when it came to producing the results that you did. And all of a sudden you've got to say, okay, I can't do that anymore. I've got to teach these other group of people how to take that over. That's a huge transition, and it's starting over in many ways for an entrepreneur.
What books or any kind of media have influenced you most that you think you found most beneficial to your life?
The traditional Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People, way back in the day. That's what I was reading in college on the floor of Barnes & Nobles. Great. And after that, there's a lot of great books from Dan Kennedy on direct response marketing. I think Dan's a great teacher, and his principles are applicable to any industry. After that, it really has just transitioned into leverage and scaling. From a philosophical standpoint, obviously Atlas Shrugged. That's been a huge inspiration in my life, and it was really interesting, specifically in 2007, 2008. Having read that book and watching what was happening around the world, it was almost as if it was straight out of the pages.
Right.
And it's still happening.
Yeah.
Rocket Fuel is, from a scaling standpoint, a phenomenal little book to help you as an entrepreneur make that transition and get to a point of essentially working on your business instead of in it. The E-Myth is where that line came from. Yeah. So my home is filled with hundreds of books. I'd say I've probably read half of them. The others are still on the to-do list.
Right. And are you finding that there's a lot of blogs that maybe are beneficial too, as compared to just books, but there's other forms of content out there that you can go get?
Interestingly enough, I think that's the biggest challenge young entrepreneurs have today, is they're growing up with Instagram and 15-second story videos and 5-minute videos on YouTube and Twitter and blog posts. And it's more information than ever, with less value than ever. And for me, I found that success is in the details. I found that if I will focus on acquiring a piece of knowledge or a skill that I spend a year on, and maybe read 5 books on, or 3-ring binders on, or go to conferences on, and I get down to a level where I'm debating which word I should use out of a document that has 10,000 words because I know that word is going to make a difference. That's the difference between success and not. And I don't think specifically young entrepreneurs these days really understand that. And so they wonder why they're watching hours of content a day and still not accomplishing anything. So for me, I view it as a negative in many ways, especially if you're just starting out. You're much better served reading a book that's 200, 300 pages long from end to end. You're going to come out of that with a real set of understanding and skills rather than, a 10-page blog post.
Yeah, and I that's what I've noticed is that depth is important, and it's that extra little few percent of knowledge that is the tipping point as to success versus failure. That's what separates you, as an expert as compared to somebody who's kind of an amateur.
Success is in the details.
Yeah, really is. So I'm an admirer of self-made man for a lot of reasons. I think we share some of the common roots in our philosophies and what's influenced us. And so just the title caught me when I saw Self-Made Man. I actually own that sculpture. Tell me about it and where you're going with it.
Self-Made Man was inspired at a Tony Robbins event. I went to Date with Destiny in 2014, and I was at a transition point in my career and my life where I'd built 2 successful companies, and I needed a new challenge. And I wasn't sure exactly what to do yet, but I knew of 2 problems that I was aware of that I thought I could solve. One was in the food production industry, and this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I live right across the street from the headquarters of Whole Foods here in Austin, Texas, and shopped in the produce section every day. I do a lot of juicing, and if you do some juicing at Whole Foods, you're walking out with $60, $70 worth of produce. Yeah. It's not cheap, and it really bothered me that you have to be fairly wealthy in the United States just to buy food that is not covered in poison. Right. And I thought that was really screwed up. So I had an idea to essentially solve that problem. And I wanted to put clean organic food in everybody's home at a price they could afford. Mm-hmm. So I actually went out and bought a bunch of books on hydroponics on Amazon, and started to make notes and come up with ideas on how to solve this. And fairly simply put, it had to produce enough food for you and your family on a monthly basis that would replace your run to the grocery store. Had to be easy so that everybody could use it. You don't have to have any knowledge of plants, and it had to be pretty because it's going to be in your house. Mm-hmm. So I've never developed a physical product, never really grown anything, definitely not dove into tech or hydroponics. So it started on Amazon with a few books and a few phone calls to some industrial design firms, and I had a little mock-up made on Photoshop on Odesk. I paid a guy $200 to take this idea and make a little photo of it. And a couple of months later, we signed on with a phenomenal firm in Silicon Valley, and we're going to make the first automated farm for your house that'll grow all of your food. And the idea is, how do we decentralize the ag industry? Because if you get rid of the farm and the farmer and the tractor and the 18-wheelers and the 1,000 miles of highway or the massive tankers that float from continent to continent, and if you get rid of the pesticides and the distribution centers and finally the retail center, guess what? Your food goes down 90%. You get rid of 100% of the pesticides and the pollution, and everything starts and ends in your kitchen. But no one had really ever done that before on a consumer level space. Mm-hmm. You can find little countertop systems you can use to grow some basil or mint, but that was about it. Right. So we built it. And we built it about 2.5 years. We built a system that would grow about $4,000 a year worth of food, and for $400. Wow. And fully automated. You just drop in the seed, and the lights take care of everything else, and the nutrients, and the dosing, and the pH balancing, and all of that. And it was phenomenal, but it almost bankrupted me. So that was a big lesson learned, because I funded all of it. And right as we were getting to a point where, okay, we've got a prototype working, what do we do next? This was my lesson learned and lack of skill set in this industry. How much longer is this going to take? Well, probably through safety testing, development, package design, service centers, another 2 years, another $2 or $3 million. It's like, oh crap. Because when we first started this, the budget was $500,000, at least that was the estimate. Mm-hmm. We were way beyond that at that point. And so I hit a point where I essentially had to go raise money or pull the plug on it. Mm-hmm. And I ended up talking to a mentor of mine, asking him for advice. And he said, look for a win or a way to win in this, even though it might not look like the initial road that you had intended. Can you do anything with your competitors? And so I called up a competing company who had just launched a phenomenal line of products that were like ours. They had a Y Combinator, had a ton of money, big team, and I ended up investing in them. And I pulled the plug on Evergrow, which was the company at the time. And the backup plan after that was Self-Made Man. And the other problem that I took away from Tony's event was the fact that I've seen at least a huge decay in the value system here in the United States from Washington and Wall Street on down. Now it's get the result you want at any cost, whether you have to lie, cheat, or steal. And there was not a lot of pride being taken in craftsmanship and quality and work ethic. It was just, where's my money? And I thought that that was going to lead to a really nasty place here in the US a generation from now. You look at how many young men specifically are growing up without dads and role models. Really bad situation. Straight out Atlas Shrugged again.
Right.
So the backup plan was, how can we elicit change on a society level, paradigm essentially over a generation or two. And looking back in history, I've really only found that there's two ways to do that. It's through the barrel of a gun, as many dictators have done, or it's by indoctrinating the kids in the next generation with a different value set.
Right.
So obviously for me, I went that route. And the goal for Self-Made Man is to really provide young men with mentors and leadership and an education set and a philosophy of life that will lead them to become really productive, honest members of society. And that was the goal. And it really took on a life of its own.
How long has it been out there now?
We launched the podcast in the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, and that's really all it was at the time. I'm going to do a weekly show with amazing people. And then this year, 2018, we launched the education platform that we've been building. And essentially it's an online school for young men with ambition. It's basically the audience that we are targeting. Or if you're 18, frankly, to 40 and you have ambition and you want to achieve something more in life, we want to provide you with the mentorship and the knowledge you need to accomplish that. So
is the way, just go to selfmademan.com and people can find the podcast and other materials there?
Yeah.
How rewarding has this been for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be getting just a little message from someone who is like, man, you're just listening to the podcast sent me down a new direction in life, and here's where I was before and here's where I am today. And that's really my goal is, I had a pretty vivid dream recently where there was a bunch of pictures of families on the wall that I was looking at, and they were all super happy and stoked and feeling just like they're where they were meant to be. And those were all of the families whose lives essentially had changed direction because they were exposed to what we're building. And so for me, that's what I'm after.
So after all these years now that you've put into your entrepreneurial career, are you finding growth in your fulfillment? Are you finding that's waning, or there's burnout? How are you feeling about it all now?
The longer I pursue my career as an entrepreneur, the more I realize I don't know. And Evergrow is a perfect lesson for that, where I paid a really high stupid tax. And you pay the tax, and you're going to pay the tax in one form or another. You're either going to pay it because you're going to go out and buy courses in education and acquire the knowledge you need to pursue what you're building, or you're going to pay it in the form of mistakes, time and money lost. There's no avoiding it, but one choice is better than the other. And so, the more I challenge myself, the more lessons I learn, and I've still got a hell of a long way to go. So,
One of my premises or sayings around this is that the great thing about entrepreneurs is that they fall in love with their ideas. But the problem with entrepreneurs is that they fall in love with their ideas.
Yeah, that was a big part of Evergrow.
Yeah.
Was learning that and getting a lot of pieces of wisdom around that from others who'd gone through that. And thankfully, I was willing to listen to them.
So we've covered a lot of ground. It's been really, really stimulating. Any final thoughts?
The biggest lessons I've learned, again, are if you're stuck and you want to become unstuck and make progress, go master a new skill set to the point where you can write a book on it. the point where you can provide that service or skill set to other people, you know, as a service provider. At that point, you can open so many doors, but as long as you keep reading about that and not doing it, you're going to stay where you're at. Second piece of advice would be to really master your emotions when it comes to money, because making money and keeping money are two very different skill sets, and that's another lesson I've had to learn through my career as well. So start to study that now. Start to assume that you've got $1 million in the bank and start to make a plan for it and to decide how you're going to use it. And then finally, when you have an idea for a solution that can help a lot of people, once again, look for that greatest point of leverage. And know from day one that in order to ascend to that point, it's going to be all about people. It's going to have to, your skill set is going to have to change from creating or selling your product to building a team and really growing a great group of people and becoming a leader. And just keep that in mind as well.
Great advice, great wisdom. Thanks so much for taking the time to sit and share it with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
To see the next episode in the Money Revealed series, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
The really best CEOs on earth are monotonous. They repeat themselves over and over and over. But everybody else thinks success is all about changing and adapting. No, it's about finding your purpose